that we love questions from the audience. So you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. Thanks for meeting us for coffee. Watco Logistics makes supply chains simple. Whether it's rail, road, river, ocean, or intermodal, they manage your supply chain with efficiency and care. From heavy haul trucking to e-commerce fulfillment, they tailor solutions that fit your business, no matter the size or the complexity. Watco combines smart technology with real human insight to keep your cargo moving and your operations running smoothly. You can learn more about their full suite of services at watco.com/logistics. Hi guys, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 52 of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. We have a few announcements to go through today. Number one being super excited that today is the first day to launch our partnership with Watco Logistics. So that's something that I'm just very personally excited about. Actually, fun fact, nobody knows where Tonganoxie, Kansas is. It's my hometown, born and raised. And some of the people from the leadership team at Watco Logistics are also from this neck of the woods. So really cool when I got to learn that and find that out. It was kind of like meeting just my local townsfolk at the Watco Logistics building. So they are local here to the Kansas City area, and Kansas is their headquarters, corporate office. So just really excited to be partnering with that awesome company from my neck of the woods. I hope you guys are excited to learn more about produce today. I know I am. I was never directly involved in produce logistics myself until I started working with some clients who were, and it really opened my eyes to the space. And I'm still feel like I have a lot to learn, and it's produce peak season. So excited to have a produce market update today. If you guys are listening in, would love to know where you're listening from, see if anyone's maybe in any of these produce heavy areas, or if you're involved in produce, transportation, or work, definitely drop a comment and let us know. We'd love to know who all our produce, transportation, and logistics experts are that are listening in. And we'd also love your input and feedback and questions as we go throughout the show. A few announcements real quickly. We have 4 conferences coming up that we can save you some money on with some discount codes. The next closest one, I believe, is going to be DATCon. That's in Chicago in September. We have the code coffee at registration. Saves you $200, really easy. And then after that is going to be JOC Inland Distribution, which is a favorite of mine and it has been for a few years. If you at checkout, if you put in the code, I think it's we updated that code? It's in the comments. I put it in the comments of this podcast somewhere. That'll save you guys 15% at registration. And then after that, thinking a little bit further out, we have Trimble Insight in November, and we also have a code that will save you guys $150 before that. And then thinking all the way into next year, we have Manifest, which is growing and a huge conference. So you definitely benefit by planning early on that one. The rates are the cheapest they're going to get the sooner you do it. And we can save you guys another couple $100 there as well on your registration. So check all that out. I think I put it all in the comments here in this on LinkedIn. If you guys are listening on Spotify or Apple or anything after the fact, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn or send me an email and ask me, and I will be happy to get all those over to you. Okay, enough of me. I'd like to bring on my guest today. I have Adam joining me today. Adam, thanks so much for being here. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Excited to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about your background, which I think you have a cool background story, and a little bit more also about DeGroot Logistics and how it came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run the DeGroot family of companies, the oldest of which is DeGroot's Vegetable Farms. So that's where I'm calling from now, actually in St. Anne, Illinois. So we're headquartered an hour south of Chicago. So I run that with my brothers, older brother Andrew, younger brother Aaron. We would represent the fourth generation of, vegetable farmers here in St. Anne, the DeGroot family. And I grew up in that, on a vegetable farm, from a pretty young age, working in the packing shed, gravitated to the sales side of the business pretty early on. My side hustle in high school and first part of college was selling at farmers markets around Chicago. And, just fell in love with commodity markets, transportation markets that kind of underpin them. So I went to Loyola University, graduated in 2010, came back, took over the vegetable sales piece of the farm. And my father had started in 2002, started a produce brokerage business, just kind of round out our growing season. And, I took over that, started expanding that around that time. And, business grew for a couple of years, got to the point where, transportation became a bottleneck really. And 2013, this was the first tight, reefer market in my short career at that point. And I was spending all my time on the transportation side. So, saw an opportunity to kind of spin off our transportation department, which was me at that point, into a separate entity. So started DeGroot Logistics, a good friend of mine, college roommate. He's our COO today. Two of us were, figuring out what the hell we were doing, from the get-go. But we came at, the space with, work at another, brokerage or 3PL or, in a transportation department besides that, so we really, we kind of built it brick by brick, bootstrap the business. That's something we're proud of, independent, there's no outside capital to this day. And that allows us to really take a long-term view and really, I think, make the right decisions over the long run too. So those are the three operating companies. And more recently, we're a smaller 3PL, we're looking for ways to punch above our weight class. So we've articulated, a logistics tech strategy. We acquired a company a little over a year ago called Doc 4-in-1, and we're building another company rolling out called Freight SOS too. It's all about exception management, in the freight space. So that's a DeGroot family of companies.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And good morning to Ben, Patrick, thanks for being here. And Courtney, I love the comment. Courtney's also from Tonganoxie, Kansas. So we're going to get Tonganoxie on the map through this podcast somehow. But thank you guys for listening in. We appreciate you guys being here. Okay. Well, also I'll go ahead and tell everyone too that before we were talking, Adam said that he's on the farm. And so the Wi-Fi is a little spotty. But I've been able to hear him just fine. So if anything, I think we're doing just great, but you guys might notice him just lag for a minute, but his audio is going to be there. So we're doing good. Just wanted to let you know. Can you tell us a little bit more to kick off this conversation about the current overview, if you will, of where we're at right now with the produce market? I know this is peak, at least peak in certain parts of the country for produce, but what does that mean? What is produce peak season and what's happening right now across the country?
Yeah, you're right. It's my favorite time of year. We're the Southwest, the Southeast are kind of in full swing. I think what's notable currently in this season, the last 6 months, really the last 12 months, there's been, I think, probably the most favorable stretch of growing conditions nationally than we've seen in quite a while. The Southeast, we're tracking like growing degree days, trying to kind of forecast supply in different areas, and like large crops, Florida, Southern Georgia. I just got back last week. I was at our farm in Southern Georgia. We got growing operations in Bainbridge, Georgia. Everything's bountiful there. There's a lot coming out. So what that's meant is, volumes are stronger, on the produce front, and prices are lower, when there's crops, that puts pressure on markets. So you've seen that, there's kind of across the board on a wholesale basis, some of the lower prices, potatoes, sweet corn, all sorts of different commodities in between, than we've seen the last few years. So while freight rates are ticking up, I think it's kind of well established, the narrative that, we're probably in a tightening cycle in capacity and freight rates. The reality for, produce shippers, if they're dealing with cheaper commodity prices, like they're looking for savings wherever they can. So the reality too is operating costs for farms are at all-time highs. While commodity prices might be down, the inputs, labor, seed costs, at really everything you can imagine is just creeps up, a little bit every year. So that's kind of the reality. But yeah, overall, good crops are a good thing.
Random question that just popped in my head. I remember reading a lot about the Canadian tariffs impacting some of our agricultural fertilizers. Have you guys felt impacts of that this year?
Yeah, we haven't really directly. I mean, a lot of the organophosphate, like traditional fertilizers, we rely on foreign sources for them. So it's definitely a kind of weak flank. But a lot of what we've shifted to our farm and many farms are like different biologicals, like different kind of programs where the supply chain is more domestic. So, I think you'll see, while we rely on, imports for a lot of traditional stuff, there's still a lot of innovation to be done, and to nearshore some of that stuff too. So the agronomy hat, my older brother would wear, so I can outkick my coverage pretty quick in that conversation. But yeah.
So it's interesting to me, I guess, when you think about like the freight side of produce, the better growing season there is, meaning just like the more supply there is readily available for buyers, then I guess the more that helps to kind of keep a lid on rates. I remember a couple years ago, I think it was, I had a friend who is in transportation on a retailer side, and my friend was saying that wherever we find like whatever it was like leafy greens or something, we're just buying it. Like if anyone has it available, we're buying it. And because there was some type of crop damage or shortage that had caused, at least it's, even if it's just temporary, even if it's just for a couple weeks, it kind of makes things go a little bit haywire. And it's just that kind of supply and demand balance. So it's interesting. I hadn't considered it, to hear from you that the more readily available crops we have, actually the more pressure that can put on freight rates. Cause I guess there's just more options and people are being more cost conscious.
Yeah, right? And farms and shippers are, just looking for savings if prices are cheaper, but definitely there's more demand for, freight. So it kind of lifts the market. But a lot of commodities, I mean, that's one of the inherent challenges with produce is supply is, you can't precisely forecast what you're going to be shipping in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We'll be starting in a few days here with the first crop we harvest in Illinois, zucchini. It's probably about a 50-day, period from when you plant it to when you harvest it. That all depends on the temperature and growing degree days and all that. So, everyone is familiar with, that item. Like if you get precipitation in the right heat units, it can grow a few inches a day, So scouting, the only way you can really identify what your supply is from a farm is getting on the field and looking all the time. So the, forecasting supply is difficult. Weather, you could have a day's worth of orders. And if you're a watermelon shipper or a sweet corn shipper, you get heavy rains, you're not in the field, you're not harvesting. So That's a bunch of tonus. That's a bunch of, retailers, buyers have to go shift to other regions to store stuff on short notice.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of acts of God that kind of, kind of throw a wrench in plans that get made.
Yeah. And for anyone who is listening who maybe like me just a year ago wasn't as familiar with produce transportation, a lot of this stuff is literally like getting cut in the field that morning and shipping out that evening or that day or within 24 hours. And so it's incredibly time sensitive. It's a very complex space, and I've heard it referred to a lot as being like higher touch or like more difficult freight. So could you just kind of talk to me about like all the reasons maybe that it's considered higher touch or more difficult? What are some of the ways that from a provider standpoint, for like a carrier or a broker, it's more difficult to manage produce freight?
There's just, and this is something that will never change. There's a higher incidence of claims. It's highly perishable, so more can go wrong for sure. But, some of the reasons are unavoidable. Like we talk about weather, the difficulty in forecasting supply. Some of it's cultural. I think for those reasons, historically, for whatever reason, there's more first come for some of these legitimate reasons, but first come, first serve, is kind of more of a practice at farms and shippers. And, very few, you're starting to see more, it's something we're observing, we're trying to push for, starting to see more move towards pickup appointments. And there needs to be, I think it's a lot more planning internally within farms and shippers, but there's a lot that can be done to kind of make their freight more palatable to carriers and drivers out there. I think there's this cultural preference for not paying, industry average detention or layover pay or accessorials. We used to hear, we still hear it. It's a lot less than what we used to, but it's a produce load. There's no detention, it's going to be paid here. So, to your point, if trucks are checking in early and, products being picked in the field, like it's 6 to 8 hour or more loading times are not unusual. And there's many parts of the country, where round the clock loading is typical, but it's a lot of work that goes into it. I think for all the folks that are in supply chain and produce supply chain that haven't been to a farm, a packing shed, I definitely encourage you to go check it out, and it's illuminating for people that don't live in it every day, like just how much goes into every load,
Yeah. I think that another note on this, the concept of it's a produce load, so you're not going to get that whole mindset of it's going to take 6 hours to load, or you might be detained, or you risk having a claim that's going to make it difficult because now how are you going to get the stuff off your truck? Where is it going? All of those factors, from what I've observed, have kind of naturally gone into pricing, into just pricing into the actual rate per mile of the load or the total load rate that you're giving back. And so it's like priced itself higher because of all the risk and factors and variables associated with it into the tune that it's difficult to say unless you're in it yourself. Like historical data is going to be your most reliable source of produce pricing data if you have it. It's like proprietary. And I think it's a very difficult space to go say like, oh, we're going to use a rating tool, or we're going to go use DAT average to price produce lanes, because that just isn't, it's quite simply just not true. I also don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think a whole lot of produce is necessarily, a majority of produce is transacting on public load boards because of all of the nuances that go into it.
And to build on that too, I think it's just in rural, by definition, in rural areas, I think some of the rating tools are just thinner data, in those places. And, even if you're looking at 3-day data averages, that's a lifetime in the produce industry in some cases. I mean, some of these busy shipping seasons are like 5 weeks long, where we farm in Georgia, the sweet corn from Memorial Day to the 4th of July. Most of the sweet corn in the eastern half of the country comes out of that county. And these guys have, there's 20,000 acres of sweet corn or more down there, and they've got 50 days to get the crop out, so things move pretty quickly for sure.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Well, I would guess I would kind of like to say we've pointed out a lot of reasons that it's difficult or it's complicated, but I know that you probably are someone with a lot of ideas and solutions as well. So I'd like to kind of maybe put ourselves in the shoes of shippers. Firstly, if we were the shippers of this produce, like what is something that they could be considering and doing from the viewpoint of the carrier or the broker that could maybe make them easier to work with, help them unlock some savings as well, or satisfy their customers?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think as the markets kind of come down over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of pressure across the board, but I think there's still a tremendous amount of value to be saved or created from how you appoint loads, and this is kind of a philosophical kind of belief, like for whatever reason, freight is generally priced in distance. When people talk about the market, it's Chicago to Dallas or whatever, that makes sense. But in reality, I think for people, for drivers, for carriers, for people managing budgets and all that, like it's really priced in time. So, I think the biggest thing, especially as more freights become shorter haul, we exhaustively kind of look for opportunities to how can we build loads so that there's as little time in it as possible, and from our farm, we have lanes. A lot of stuff we do is, we ship locally when we're in season. And if you're delivering, we have an example where it's mini loads, might be 10, 15 loads a week, where 250-mile haul, if you don't push for the right appointments for that, we've kind of set that up so it's all mid-afternoon to evening, and if you can deliver straight through, that might be 50% of the rate of something that might be, picking up this morning, delivering tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. or something like that,
Yeah.
So that, and again, every shipper, and this is something we built Doc 1 to really help shippers identify, when there's bid events, when there's RFPs, or when carriers are getting onboarded, they're usually given a lane data, and like, go price this for me. And it's zip code to zip code, and there'll be volume usually. And that's about it. Like there's not a whole lot of other context. And
I've actually heard in produce, a lot of times it's not uncommon to have state to state and not even get zip codes.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're not sure, so incumbents have this tremendous advantage that shippers might not really fully appreciate all the time. And what that means, where, if some new pricing comes in, it's very attractive. It's usually attractive for the wrong reasons. And those lanes where there's turnover on, where there's this lack of information, there's going to be bad outcomes. Like I think that's the biggest thing. Shippers are, if you have lanes where your turnover is high on a carrier basis or driver basis, you're more exposed to rate volatility, even if you think you're contracting it, and even if your policy is to contract and not go on the spot market. So that distance thing, and how appointments are set, there's been a lot of innovation happening in the appointment automation side of things. But we've tried to, that's to me, the art of, brokering freight and supply chain planning versus the science side of it. It's like, if you're good at that, if you're good at building loads and understanding how to, engage shippers to adjust how they're, kind of building that, there's plenty of opportunities where there's win-win-wins between shipper, carriers, and brokers, that are out there. And I think too often, there's this kind of feeling that it's, I win, you lose, that kind of mentality. So that's the stuff we like working on.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. What would you say, make this a little bit more complicated, because I know that this situation happens too. What would you say to say like like a lot of retailers have large produce spends, right? They have to bring in a lot of produce. They have to get it into their distribution centers, and they're managing their freight. They're controlling their freight, but they don't control those produce sheds or those ship sites. And it could be possible they barely even know these sites, right? If they're sourcing their produce, like wherever they have to go to get it. So in my mind, the responsibility kind of falls to the transportation team to be like listening and coordinating with your carriers and your brokers and like listening to the issues and managing those. But is there really a good way to handle that? Because let's say you find like the one place you can find to get whatever those blueberries are that you need, and then it's like 6-hour detentions at shipper. And as a retailer, like what do you do in these situations?
Yeah, for starters, I'd say sign up for Doc 411. We really, that's where we position ourselves. Retailers, food service companies, processors, like large and small, they generally know their own facilities really well. But, if you're a large retailer, you might have 50 distribution centers. You might pick up at 5 to 10,000 locations, not just produce, but like all facilities. So, and again, when care is being onboarded, like, none of that data is being passed on. And what we do with Doc 411 is we help shippers, brokers, large carriers enrich that facility data and build SOPs around, like what are procedures to check in? What are, we have over 70 attributes on each profile. Is there overnight parking on site? What are the appointment setting procedures? I mean, just that little fact, broker gets in with a new customer, gets awarded something, 50 lanes, 50 different shipping points. They got to go figure out, how to, or engage the right people in the shipper and have dozens of little conversations around like, oh, how do I schedule this appointment that I just want to load on picking up in a few days? So, that kind of organizing all that tribal knowledge and like packaging it up in one place. That's what we're all about. That's what we do. And I think in many cases, those, to your point, like accessorials, if there's detention or layover on the shipper side, those shippers are paying for that. And they, as you say, like they don't have control over what's going on here. But when you can have these conversations with vendors, if you're a shipper, armed with data, if you have, in the form of driver reviews, that's something we do on Doc 411, collect driver facility reviews and their feedback and their experience. It's a lot more straightforward. And when it's anecdotal, it's harder to kind of build those corrective actions in place and all that. So, there's reasons why produce will always be a little more challenging, but that doesn't change the fact that those, the communication can be there, that there's a lot of shippers that are, above average and they should be rewarded, I think over time, they need to grade, facilities, the concept of facility scores and how that impacts pricing is something our industry needs sorely and something we're working on every day for sure.
I don't know if you saw that, but Cody had a comment too, and he said lead time for produce is always a challenge compared to other freight as well. I've also seen that too, where we get, 12-hour, 10-hour lead times as well.
Sure.
One other thing that I've noticed in produce, and I don't think this is maybe just specific to produce, actually. I think it's like refrigerated foods in general, maybe even heightened in produce, is I've seen one of two things happen working with different shippers. I've seen shippers staff like load planners who spend a lot of time to create like these 6-pick, 3-drop truck routes for one truck. And then I've seen companies who don't have the resources to do that and just need their product. And I've seen them send 8 pallets of berries in a full 53-foot truck and just pay the rate. So what are some of the reasons, and have you seen progress, I guess, in the last few years as we're trying to get better with tech and with consolidations and with eliminating waste? But like what's your stance on trying to get better at consolidating in the produce space?
Well, I think you still see a lot of that. It's less than you used to. The consolidation on the buyer side, I mean, there's fewer everything, than there was 10, 20 years ago, fewer retailers, food service companies, like processors. So I think as that consolidation has happened, you're seeing that on the farm side too. And, I know in Florida and California, in Texas, like from when I started in the industry, like there's a lot more facilities will do that consolidation. But the reality too is, on the shippers, on the retailer side, produce is one of the higher margin departments. So, if you've got to pay more for freight, what might seem like, if you're paying 20% on because you need a day of truck and what the market might be, and you're putting together several pick load, that load might be worth, 50K plus, and the margin that's substantial. So the cost of running out of product, in your DC or the store is much more expensive. So, you just have to work with partners that are built for that lead time and understand, what's possible there. So, that's not everybody. There's a lot of large players that are just not great at that. And you have to work with, brokers and carriers that are staffed accordingly. Like, these orders sometimes come in after hours. They come in on weekends, yeah, that's really how we try to position ourselves. And especially, I mean, we know when it's going into holidays, the week or two before holidays, when that all happens too. So, yeah, just have to have the right team. Yep.
What's the appetite? Is there an appetite to have your freight mixed with other people's freight when you're in produce? Like, do your retailers, like, I'm sure that there's plenty of opportunities, especially for like the actual farmers, to be like, we're about to send 3 partial loads to the same metro area. Is there not opportunity really, or willingness to want to commingle there?
I think you see it more with produce brokers or, co-op type models where many farms kind of aggregate their sales. And, it's very common, marketing companies handle certain commodities and regions, but definitely it gets more complicated, and when you've got conventional LTL, rules, I don't think would fit too well in the produce space. There's some neat, there's innovation going on. FreshX is a new logistics tech, platform that's all about breaking into that space. And, I think you'll see more of that, and it's one of the hardest corners of the truckload market to really figure out. But, I mean, that's why, and it's common to see produce shippers, have, the same reason we get into the logistics space, and understanding if it's not a competitive advantage, if you're not better at it than everybody else, it's going to cost you sales. It's going to cost you, when a customer can ask you like last minute, hey, can we ship those 8 pallets of blueberries? If you can get that done consistently, you're going to be, top of that routing guide on the produce side. So it's just very important to invest in that capability for sure.
Yeah. I have one last question for you, but before we do that, for anyone who wasn't here at the very beginning, I did announce that this is our first episode being sponsored by Watco Logistics. So I want to go ahead and give them a shout out, but I was also thinking about them in the food space. So Watco Logistics provides some really unique solutions on the rail side with bulk intermodal solutions, and they are excellent at transporting raw materials and into the food supply chain. And so I think I was talking to Adam, and I think Adam said you've seen this in action before, right?
Yeah, we had a program with them last year. We collaborated on great guys to work with, but it was a unique one. I don't know if this is a very common deal, but it involved the hauling of bulk potatoes in a rail car from Idaho to the eastern seaboard. So different, tricky project in a lot of ways, but it was pretty neat one to work on.
Yeah. So just wanted to put that out there for anyone. I've seen Watco do some really unique things in the food supply chain when it comes to rail, transload, and over the road, but really cool solutions there, and really excited to be partnering with Watco for the podcast. Last question for you before I let you go, and we'll see if anyone in the audience has questions, guys, please get them in now. We'll try to get to those before we go. 4th of July is just a few weeks away. And so that's usually, I hear a lot about a buildup to the 4th when we're talking about kind of a summer peak produce. So what do you kind of anticipate or expect, just looking forward the next few weeks into the holiday, and any thoughts on how that might impact supply chains over the next few weeks?
Yeah, I'd say, just kind of given what we talked about, the improved growing conditions, like there's plenty of volume. Crops are plentiful. We're not dealing with shortages in as many commodities as you normally see. There's certainly some. The produce industry's, it's 50 different markets. There's a lot going on, but by and large, we expect that whatever the average is in these produce heavy regions, it's going to be a little tighter. Rates are going to be a little higher than average. Even notwithstanding that we're we're a little down from prior years. So I think the thing that, can surprise everybody in the when you're in the middle of that pre-holiday rush is like this background narrative that, the freight market's looser and the capacity is available. And then when it hits, you still get these local shortages and, some pretty tight situations. So, I would say, like, don't be lulled into any sort of, if you look too much at what the, last year average is or whatever, like comparing it to last year, keep your eyes on the road too. I think it's going to be, we're expecting things to be a little more normal, a little tighter than normal,
Yeah. I think we've heard that too in just in general, like a little bit more back to that tightness of like seasonality that we kind of missed the last couple of years in a lot of ways. So I think, that's probably a good thing to keep in mind heading up to a really busy time of the year in freight. Is just maybe you need to go back a few years in our rate tools and historicals to start comparing more to what things used to be prior to the last couple of years. Yeah.
I agree with that. Oh yeah.
Awesome advice there. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. If anyone has more questions about DeGroot Logistics, just connecting with you, talking more about some of your technology tools and endeavors, like what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, it's an easy way. You can email me, adamd@DeGrootLogistics.com, adam@DeGrootFarms.com. I got a few different hats, so a few different emails for sure, but LinkedIn's usually the quickest way to kind of connect with me.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for all the comments. We appreciate you guys being on the show, engaging, letting us know that you're here. And thank you to everyone for meeting us for coffee.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for meeting us for coffee. I'm so excited to be partnered with Watco as our show sponsor. Not only was Watco founded in my home state of Kansas, but the solutions they provide are, in my honest opinion, unmatched. If you have questions about Watco, you can scan this QR code to connect, check out the link in the episode description, or you can shoot me a message on LinkedIn directly, and I'm happy to talk more. If you enjoyed today's show, I'd love if you could leave a rating on your platform of choice. We'll see you next time.